November 8, 2015. On Australia's Gold Coast, a morning that should have passed without notice became the starting point of a case that would raise difficult questions about warning signs, accountability, and a justice system under pressure. Shortly after the day's commute began, emergency services received a call from a young woman involved in what first appeared to be a serious road collision. She was able to tell the operator where she was, and for a brief moment, it seemed help was only minutes away. A nearby resident heard the impact and ran toward the scene, believing someone inside the damaged vehicle needed immediate assistance. Moments later, another man arrived. At first, nothing about his presence stood out. To those watching, he appeared to be another person responding to an emergency. Then everything changed. The tone of the emergency call shifted without warning. The operator realized the situation was no longer following the pattern of a routine rescue, and the conversation came to an abrupt end. When police and paramedics reached the scene, the evidence suggested they were dealing with something far more complex than a traffic investigation. Witness statements, physical evidence, and the emergency call all pointed detectives in the same direction. The woman at the center of the case was 24-year-old Tara Brown. As investigators reconstructed the events of that morning, they found that the answers did not begin at the crash site. They led back through years of documented reports, repeated requests for protection, a relationship that had steadily deteriorated, and a series of decisions that would later become the focus of official reviews. To understand how that morning became the subject of one of Australia's most closely examined criminal cases, we have to begin years earlier, when the first warning signs appeared, and when they were still possible to ignore. Years before her name became linked to a case that would receive national attention, Tara Brown was building a life that, by all accounts, reflected the future she hoped to create. Born in New Zealand, Tara later moved with her family to Australia's Gold Coast, where she spent most of her childhood and teenage years. The move gave her a fresh start, and as she settled into her new surroundings, she became known as someone who was dependable, approachable, and committed to the people closest to her. She attended Keebra Park State High School, where she developed a strong interest in athletics. Track and field became an important part of her life, teaching her discipline, consistency, and the value of hard work. Friends and classmates remembered her as someone who preferred earning respect through dedication rather than seeking attention. She formed lasting friendships and was known for keeping her commitments both on and off the field. After finishing school, Tara began working as a legal assistant. It was a career that suited her practical mindset. She enjoyed having structure, valued responsibility, and looked forward to building a stable future. Those who knew her said she approached life with patience and believed that steady effort would eventually lead to the goals she had set for herself. Her relationship with her family remained especially close. Her mother, Natalie Brown, was a constant source of encouragement, and the two shared a strong bond that continued well into Tara's adult life. Family members described Tara as someone who regularly stayed in touch, supported those around her, and placed great importance on maintaining those relationships. In 2012, Tara welcomed her daughter, Arya. Becoming a mother brought new priorities and a renewed focus on creating a secure home. Friends later recalled that much of her attention centered on balancing work with raising her young daughter, and she often spoke about wanting Arya to grow up surrounded by love, stability, and opportunity. From the outside, Tara's life appeared to be moving in the direction she had planned. She had a career she enjoyed, a supportive family, and clear hopes for the future. Yet, as investigators would later learn, the public image revealed only part of the picture. Away from work and everyday routines, circumstances had begun to change in ways that only a handful of people fully understood. That contrast between appearance and reality would become one of the defining themes of the investigation, and it begins with the next person to enter Tara's life. Long before court proceedings and national headlines placed Lionel Patea under public scrutiny, he was known on the Gold Coast for his athletic ability. As a teenager, Patea earned recognition as one of the area's promising rugby league players. Coaches and teammates regarded him as a talented competitor with the physical ability to pursue the sport at a higher level. During those years, much of his time centered on training, matches, and the opportunities that rugby appeared to offer. It was also during this period that he met Tara Brown while they were both students at Kebra Park State High School. Like many young couples, they entered adulthood together and began making plans for the future. Friends who knew them in those early years later recalled a relationship that, at least publicly, appeared no different from many others beginning after high school. As time passed, however, Lionel's path changed. Rather than continuing to build a career in rugby league, he became increasingly involved with the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, an international outlaw motorcycle club with an established presence in Australia. His commitment to the organization steadily grew, and he eventually held the position of sergeant-at-arms within his local chapter. According to court records and reliable reporting, that position carried responsibilities related to maintaining internal discipline and supporting the club's rules and structure. It also marked a significant change from the direction many people had expected his life to take during his teenage years. Those changes became visible outside the organization as well. References to rugby gradually disappeared from his public image, replaced by photographs and symbols connected to the motorcycle club. Friends and relatives noticed that his priorities appeared different from those they had known only a few years earlier. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline of the case, they also reviewed Lionel's documented interactions with the justice system before 2015. Those records included previous legal matters and breaches of court orders that became relevant to understanding the broader history presented during later legal proceedings. By the time the case reached court, investigators were examining more than a single event. They were looking at years of documented decisions, changing circumstances, and official records that provided context for everything that followed. Understanding that background is important because it explains how two people whose lives once appeared to be moving in the same direction gradually found themselves on very different paths. The next chapter examines how those changes began to affect their relationship behind closed doors, long before the case became known to the public. As Tara Brown and Lionel Patea moved beyond high school and into adult life, they began building what appeared to be a promising future together. They settled on the Gold Coast, shared a home, and spoke about the life they hoped to create. To relatives, friends, and people following them online, they looked like many other young couples starting the next chapter of their lives. Their social media reflected that image. There were photographs of holidays, birthdays, family gatherings, and everyday moments filled with smiles. Nothing in those public posts suggested that the relationship was becoming increasingly strained. Later court proceedings and official records would present a much different picture. People close to Tara gradually noticed changes that were difficult to explain at first. She became less available for social events and was seen less often with longtime friends. Invitations that she once accepted without hesitation were now frequently declined, and conversations with people outside her immediate household became less frequent. According to witness statements and court records, Lionel increasingly wanted to know where Tara was throughout the day, who she was spending time with, and when she planned to return home. Friends later recalled that routine outings often resulted in repeated phone calls or messages requesting updates. Over time, those around Tara began to notice that many of her daily decisions were influenced by avoiding disagreements rather than personal preference. Evidence later presented during legal proceedings also showed that financial matters increasingly came under Lionel's influence. Decisions involving household income, spending, and other routine responsibilities gradually became another source of tension. The same pattern extended into activities that had always been important to Tara. Athletics had played a significant role in her life since her school years, and she continued competing in track and field after graduation. When competitions required overnight travel, however, disagreements often followed. According to evidence reviewed in court, Tara sometimes changed her travel arrangements in an effort to reduce conflict, even when doing so created additional inconvenience. In 2012, the couple prepared for another major change with the arrival of their daughter, Arya. While becoming parents brought new responsibilities, official records indicate that the underlying issues within the relationship did not improve. During that same period, police documented a number of incidents involving the couple. Individually, each report reflected a disagreement that required official attention. Together, those records established a timeline that investigators would later examine closely. Concern within Tara's family also continued to grow. Her mother, Natalie Brown, remained one of her strongest sources of support and repeatedly encouraged her to seek assistance whenever she felt it was necessary. Other relatives and close friends also offered help, hoping the situation could be resolved safely. In May 2012, Tara successfully obtained a domestic violence protection order through the courts. The order was intended to place legal boundaries on future contact and reflected the concerns that had already been raised before the court. Only weeks later, Arya was born. According to official records, further disagreements followed in the months after her birth. One incident at the hospital required staff to step in to restore order, and authorities later documented additional allegations that resulted in legal proceedings for breaching the protection order. The court ultimately imposed a 1-month suspended sentence. The challenges did not end there. At one point, while Tara and Arya were staying with Natalie at a location that was not publicly known, police records show that Lionel repeatedly attempted to contact Tara over several hours. Investigators later confirmed through phone records that hundreds of calls and text messages were made during that period. Those records became important evidence because they provided investigators with a precise timeline supported by digital data rather than personal recollection alone. Armed with that evidence, Tara again sought assistance from police. The documented communications formed part of the legal process that followed, and Lionel was taken into custody to serve the previously suspended sentence. When investigators later reconstructed the years leading up to September 2015, they did not view these events as isolated episodes. Instead, they examined them as a documented sequence recorded through court files, police reports, witness statements, and verified phone records. That growing body of evidence provided important context for understanding the decisions that would be made in the months that followed. By late August 2015, communication between Tara Brown and Lionel Patea was increasingly shaped by legal arrangements rather than personal discussions. Much of their contact revolved around parenting responsibilities, scheduled handovers, and ongoing family court matters involving their daughter, Arya. On August 30, 2015, Tara returned to a property connected to her previous living arrangements to collect personal belongings. According to evidence later reviewed during court proceedings, she believed the visit could be completed quickly and without direct interaction. Instead, an unexpected encounter took place. Court records show that Lionel was present at the property, and a disagreement followed. During the interaction, he used his mobile phone to record parts of the encounter. The situation became serious enough that Tara later decided it should be formally reported. A family member's arrival brought the meeting to an end, and Tara was able to leave the property. The significance of that day would only become clear later. In the days that followed, Tara focused on documenting what had happened. Rather than handling the matter privately, she chose to follow official channels and seek assistance through the legal system. On September 3, 2015, Tara attended Southport Police Station accompanied by her mother, Natalie Brown, and her solicitor. Together, they met with officers and provided information they believed demonstrated an ongoing pattern of concerning behavior. Among the material presented were printed copies of text messages and other communications that Tara had preserved. She explained the circumstances surrounding the recent incident and requested additional legal protection. The meeting lasted long enough for officers to review the information provided. According to findings released after the case, police determined there was insufficient basis at that time to take immediate action. No additional protection order was issued during that visit. Years later, that decision would receive significant scrutiny. Subsequent reviews found that important information already available within police systems had not been fully considered when the report was assessed. Earlier records involving the couple, including previous legal orders and documented interactions with authorities, were not given the level of attention later investigators believed they warranted. At the time, however, none of those later findings existed. For Tara and her family, September 3 ended without the outcome they had hoped for. Despite presenting their concerns through official channels, they left the station without any new legal measures in place. The next several days appeared calm on the surface. Sunday, September 6, 2015, was Father's Day in Australia. Under existing parenting arrangements, Arya was scheduled to spend time with Lionel's family. Determined to avoid unnecessary contact, Tara adjusted her plans carefully. According to evidence later presented in court, she arrived well before the agreed handover time. The decision allowed the transfer to take place smoothly and reduced the likelihood of direct interaction. Family members completed the exchange, and no issues were reported. For the remainder of the weekend, everything appeared routine. There were no public signs that anything unusual was developing. Friends, relatives, and colleagues carried on with their normal activities. Like many weekends, it ended quietly. September 7th followed a similar pattern. Tara focused on everyday responsibilities, including work and caring for Arya. Nothing about the day suggested it would later become an important marker in a major criminal investigation. Yet when detectives reconstructed the timeline months later, these 4 days stood out for a different reason. Every step had been documented. There were witness accounts. There were police records. There were phone records. There were legal documents and confirmed timelines. Together, they created one of the clearest chronological pictures investigators would examine throughout the case. What emerged was not a story of sudden decisions or unexpected meetings. Instead, the records showed a series of planned actions, formal reports, scheduled arrangements, and documented concerns. By the evening of September 7th, that timeline appeared complete. Less than a day later, investigators would begin adding its final entries. Those entries would transform an already complicated family dispute into a case that would attract attention across Australia and lead to questions that extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Tuesday, September 8, 2015, began like countless other mornings on Australia's Gold Coast. Tara Brown followed the routine she had worked hard to maintain. She got her young daughter, Arya, ready for daycare before heading out for the day. Staff members later confirmed that the drop-off appeared completely normal. Tara signed Arya in, exchanged a few routine words with staff, returned to her car, and continued toward work. Nothing about those first few minutes suggested that the day would soon become the focus of one of Queensland's most closely examined criminal investigations. According to evidence later presented before the Supreme Court, Lionel Patea was already in the area. Investigators concluded that he positioned himself so he could observe Tara after she left the daycare center. As she entered the morning traffic, his sport utility vehicle appeared behind her. The investigation later found that this was not a random meeting. Several motorists traveling along the same route noticed two vehicles moving through successive intersections with the larger vehicle following unusually close behind the smaller one. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Morning traffic on the Gold Coast often became congested during school and work hours, causing vehicles to stop and start repeatedly. As the journey continued, however, more witnesses began paying attention. Some later told police they noticed the following distance remained unusually short even when traffic conditions changed. Others recalled seeing both vehicles continue through multiple intersections within only a few moments of each other. Each witness observed only a small part of the sequence. Individually, those observations appeared ordinary. Together, they would become an important part of the investigation. Detectives later compared every witness statement with traffic patterns, scene measurements, vehicle examinations, and other available evidence. That comparison allowed investigators to reconstruct the timeline with a high degree of confidence. Within a short period, Tara's vehicle left the roadway and came to rest on the front lawn of a nearby residential property. The collision immediately drew the attention of nearby residents. People living nearby heard the impact and rushed outside without knowing exactly what had happened. Like most people faced with an unexpected roadside emergency, their first instinct was simple: to help. One resident reached the vehicle within moments and began looking for a safe way to reach the driver while emergency services were being contacted. Others remained nearby, ready to assist however they could until professional responders arrived. At almost the same time, Lionel stopped his own vehicle and walked toward the scene. To the people already gathered, there was no obvious reason to question his presence. From their perspective, another person appeared to be responding to what looked like a serious traffic collision. That assumption lasted only a short time. As investigators later established through witness accounts, physical evidence, and information recorded during the emergency call, The events at the scene quickly moved beyond what anyone would normally expect after a road incident. Emergency call operators remained connected for as long as circumstances allowed while dispatching police, paramedics, and fire crews to the location. The recorded call later became one of several pieces of evidence used to establish the sequence of events. First responders arrived within minutes. Their immediate priority was securing the area, assisting those involved, and ensuring the safety of nearby residents and emergency personnel. Officers also began identifying witnesses before memories could fade, recording where each person had been standing and what they had personally observed. Even during those early moments, investigators recognized that important questions remained unanswered. Several details at the location did not fit the pattern of a typical traffic collision. Rather than relying on assumptions, detectives began preserving every available piece of evidence. The roadway was photographed. Vehicle positions were documented. Witnesses were interviewed separately. Physical evidence was carefully collected, and the emergency communications were secured for later review. By the end of that morning, the focus had shifted. Investigators were no longer examining only how the collision had occurred. They were working to establish the complete sequence of decisions and actions that led to it. That careful approach would eventually allow detectives to build one of the strongest evidence-based timelines in the case. Using independent witness testimony, forensic analysis, digital records, and official documentation to explain exactly what had taken place during those critical minutes. As the scene was secured on the morning of September 8, 2015, the focus shifted from emergency response to evidence collection. Detectives from the Queensland Police Service assumed responsibility for the investigation, supported by forensic specialists, collision reconstruction experts, and crime scene officers. Their task was clear from the outset: establish the sequence of events using information that could be verified through multiple independent sources. The area surrounding the incident was closed to public access while forensic teams completed a systematic examination. Officers photographed the roadway, surrounding homes, nearby intersections, vehicle positions, and every visible point that could assist later analysis. Measurements were recorded throughout the scene, allowing specialists to prepare an accurate reconstruction once the examination was complete. Nothing was left to assumption. Each observation was documented, logged, and preserved according to forensic procedures. While one team processed the scene, another began examining both vehicles. Specialists studied impact locations, vehicle movement, roadway markings, and structural evidence to determine how the events had developed. Their work relied on engineering analysis, scientific measurement, and established collision reconstruction methods rather than eyewitness accounts alone. The physical evidence was then compared with witness statements to determine whether both sources supported the same timeline. At the same time, detectives began identifying everyone who had been in the area that morning. Drivers traveling along the route were located through public appeals and follow-up inquiries. Residents who had responded after hearing the incident were interviewed separately to ensure every statement reflected each person's own observations. This approach proved valuable. Although no witness observed every stage of the morning, their individual accounts overlapped in important ways. One motorist described seeing two vehicles traveling through consecutive intersections. Another remembered the distance between them remaining unusually close. Residents near the final location explained what first drew their attention outside. When investigators arranged those accounts alongside the physical evidence, the timeline became increasingly consistent. The investigation also relied heavily on official records created in real time. Emergency communications, including Tara Brown's 000 call, were preserved as evidence. Dispatch records, response logs, and radio communications were reviewed to establish precise timings. Those records allowed investigators to compare witness observations with independently recorded events. Digital evidence added another layer to the investigation. Detectives obtained relevant mobile phone records and communication histories through the legal process. Electronic records were examined alongside the established timeline to verify movements and key moments throughout the morning. Every significant finding was checked against other available evidence before investigators reached any conclusion. That careful method became one of the strengths of the case. Rather than depending on one witness or one document, detectives compared multiple independent sources throughout the investigation. Attention also turned to the history already recorded within official systems. Investigators gathered previous police reports, court documents, protection orders, and earlier interactions involving Tara Brown and Lionel Patea. Those records provided important background and helped investigators understand the broader context leading up to September 2015. Reviewing those documents also revealed how often authorities had interacted with the situation before the events of September 8. Specialists continued their technical examinations after both vehicles had been transported to secure forensic facilities. Detailed inspections were carried out to determine whether any unexpected mechanical issue could have contributed to the incident. After completing those examinations, investigators found no evidence that a sudden equipment failure explained the sequence they were examining. That finding allowed detectives to continue focusing on the evidence already being assembled from witness statements, digital records, and scene analysis. Another important stage involved preparing visual reconstructions. Using precise measurements collected at the location, forensic mapping specialists created diagrams showing vehicle movements, roadway layout, and significant reference points. Those reconstructions later helped the court understand the chronology using measurable evidence rather than speculation. Throughout the investigation, detectives followed one consistent principle. Every important conclusion needed independent support. If witness statements described a particular event, investigators looked for physical or digital evidence that confirmed it. If electronic records established a timeline, they compared those timestamps with emergency service logs and forensic findings. Only after multiple sources aligned would investigators include those conclusions in the final case file. Over the following weeks, the investigation produced thousands of pages of material. Forensic reports, engineering analysis, witness interviews, digital evidence, emergency records, photographs, official documents, and scene diagrams were carefully organized into a comprehensive brief for prosecutors. By the time the investigation was complete, detectives believed they had assembled one of the most thoroughly documented timelines available. The case no longer depended on any single witness or individual piece of evidence. Instead, it rested on a combination of forensic science, independent testimony, digital records, and official documentation that consistently supported the same sequence of events. The next stage would move beyond the investigation itself. Every major finding, every expert opinion, and every piece of evidence would soon be examined before the Supreme Court of Queensland, where the prosecution and defense would present their cases under close judicial scrutiny. Following the events of September 8, 2015, investigators from the Queensland Police Service continued working around the clock to assemble a complete evidentiary record. The initial examination of the scene had already produced substantial physical evidence, but detectives knew that every conclusion would need to withstand detailed legal scrutiny. Over the next several days, the investigation expanded rapidly. Forensic reports were reviewed alongside witness interviews. Emergency communication records were compared with digital evidence. Collision reconstruction specialists finalized their technical findings, while detectives continued verifying every stage of the timeline through independent sources. As the evidence grew, investigators concluded that the facts supported formal criminal charges against Lionel Patea. He was taken into police custody, and the case entered the next stage of the criminal justice process. The investigation did not stop after the arrest. Detectives continued reviewing evidence, obtaining expert opinions, organizing witness statements, and preparing the prosecution brief that would eventually be presented before the Supreme Court of Queensland. By the time prosecutors completed their review, the case file contained an extensive collection of material. It included forensic examinations, engineering analysis, emergency service records, police documentation, digital evidence, photographs, witness statements, collision reconstruction reports, and court records from earlier legal proceedings involving the parties. Every document served a specific purpose. Together, they presented a detailed chronology supported by multiple independent sources. When the matter reached the Supreme Court in Brisbane, public interest was already high. The case had attracted widespread attention across Australia, not only because of the criminal proceedings themselves, but also because it had prompted broader discussions about domestic violence responses, protection orders, and how reports of ongoing intimidation should be assessed by public authorities. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution relied heavily on evidence that had already been carefully verified during the investigation. Expert witnesses explained the collision reconstruction. Forensic specialists described how physical evidence was documented and analyzed. Investigators outlined the sequence established through witness interviews, digital records, emergency communications, and official documentation. Rather than relying on one piece of evidence, the prosecution presented a case built from many independent sources that consistently supported the same timeline. At the beginning of the proceedings, Lionel Patea entered a plea of not guilty. As the legal process continued and the evidence was examined in detail, that position changed. He later entered a plea of guilty to the charge of murder. That decision significantly changed the direction of the proceedings. Instead of requiring a full jury trial to determine responsibility, the court moved to the sentencing phase, where Justice Rosalind Atkinson considered the agreed facts, legal submissions, and the broader circumstances surrounding the case. The court also reviewed the documented history leading up to September 2015. Previous protection orders, earlier police reports, court records, and other official documents formed part of the background considered during sentencing. Those records demonstrated that the events before the court had developed over an extended period rather than arising from a single isolated disagreement. Family members were then given an opportunity to address the court. Among those who spoke was Natalie Brown, Tara's mother. Her victim impact statement described the lasting effect the case had on their family, reflecting on the years leading up to the proceedings and the changes they would continue to face in the years ahead. The courtroom remained quiet as those statements were delivered. Throughout much of the hearing, Lionel Patea showed little visible reaction while listening to the evidence and the statements presented before the court. On February 27, 2017, Justice Rosalind Atkinson delivered the sentence. The court imposed life imprisonment for the murder of Tara Brown. Under Queensland law, that sentence included a 20-year non-parole period, making 2036 the earliest date on which Lionel Patea could seek parole for that conviction. However, another legal development would later extend that timeline. In 2018, Lionel Patea received another life sentence after being convicted in a separate and unrelated case involving the 2012 death of Gregory Joseph Dufty, a Gold Coast businessman. The court ordered that the sentences be administered together under Queensland law. As a result, Lionel Patea will not become eligible to apply for parole until at least 2048. Although the criminal proceedings had reached their conclusion, the case itself was far from over. Attention soon shifted away from the courtroom and toward the decisions made before September 8. Independent reviews began examining whether opportunities for earlier intervention had been missed and whether changes were needed to better assess repeated reports, documented evidence, and requests for protection. Those reviews would ultimately influence policing practices in Queensland and become one of the most significant long-term outcomes associated with the case. The court's decision closed the criminal proceedings against Lionel Patea, but it did not answer the question that continued to trouble investigators, legal experts, and Tara Brown's family. How had someone who repeatedly asked for help reached a point where no further protection was in place? That question became the focus of a separate review. After the sentencing, Queensland authorities shifted their attention from the courtroom to the decisions made in the months before September 8, 2015. Rather than concentrating on the offense itself, investigators carefully examined every report Tara had made, every request for assistance, and every response she received. Coroner Jane Bentley later reviewed the complete timeline. Her examination showed that Tara had contacted authorities on multiple occasions over several years. Each report added another piece to an increasingly clear pattern. Records showed repeated concerns, supporting evidence, applications for protection, and ongoing attempts to distance herself from Lionel Patea. Instead of looking at each report separately, the coroner considered the entire history together. One event received particular attention. On September 3, 2015, only 5 days before the incident that ended Tara's life, she attended Southport Police Station accompanied by her mother, Natalie Brown, and her solicitor. She brought printed copies of recent communications, explained her concerns, and asked officers to issue further legal protection. The later review concluded that the information available at the time warranted a stronger investigative response. According to the findings, officers had sufficient material to conduct additional inquiries and consider immediate action rather than treating the matter as a routine disagreement connected to family court proceedings. That conclusion became one of the most significant findings of the entire review. The Queensland Police Service's Ethical Standards Command also examined how the matter had been handled. After reviewing the available evidence and the officers' decisions, the investigation found that important warning signs had not been assessed appropriately. Those findings resulted in disciplinary action and prompted broader discussions about how domestic violence complaints should be evaluated in the future. For Tara's family, those findings acknowledged that mistakes had been made. However, no review or disciplinary process could change what had already happened. Natalie Brown chose to continue speaking publicly about her daughter's case. She consistently encouraged authorities to give greater weight to repeated reports, documented evidence, and long-term patterns of controlling behavior. Her message remained practical and consistent. Concerns should be assessed as a developing pattern rather than isolated incidents. The case soon gained national attention across Australia. Legal professionals examined it during training. Domestic violence specialists referred to it while discussing risk assessment. Police organizations reviewed it when considering improvements to frontline decision-making. For many observers, the case demonstrated why background information can be just as important as the most recent complaint. The reviews that followed contributed to several changes across Queensland's domestic and family violence response. Police expanded specialist training focused on identifying ongoing coercive behavior. Risk assessment procedures were strengthened. Information sharing between agencies received greater attention. Investigators were also encouraged to evaluate previous reports together instead of viewing each incident in isolation. Another lasting change involved digital evidence. Phone records, text messages, electronic communications, and documented contact attempts increasingly became recognized as valuable investigative material when assessing repeated harassment or controlling conduct. Rather than being viewed as separate events, they could help establish a broader timeline that might otherwise go unnoticed. Meanwhile, Lionel Patea remained in custody. In 2018, he was also sentenced in connection with an earlier homicide case. The court ordered the sentences to operate together, meaning he will not become eligible to apply for parole until at least 2048. Years after the case concluded, it continues to be referenced for several reasons. Investigators point to it as an example of how witness accounts, emergency call recordings, surveillance footage, digital communications, and forensic analysis can work together to reconstruct events with a high level of certainty. Legal experts often refer to it when discussing accountability and the importance of early intervention. For the wider public, the case serves as a reminder that repeated warning signs deserve careful attention long before a situation reaches its most serious stage. For Tara Brown's family, the hope has never been limited to remembering her life. They have consistently said they want her case to encourage stronger assessments, earlier action where appropriate, and continued improvements in the way repeated reports are handled. That may be the most enduring part of this case. Sometimes the most important evidence is not discovered after an investigation begins. Sometimes it already exists in previous reports, court records, digital communications, and documented requests for help. The challenge is recognizing the full pattern before time runs out. If you appreciate thoroughly researched true crime documentaries that focus on verified evidence, investigative work, and the lessons behind each case, consider subscribing. Every episode is built around official records, court proceedings, and confirmed facts so that these stories are remembered accurately while helping viewers better understand how major investigations unfold.